we're here talking about the Reformation. Does everyone know what the Reformation is? It's why we have a different church every 2 blocks, in every city. The Reformation was shockingly unique. If the United States in 10 years from now was 4 different countries, or 15 different countries, different republics, it would be more shocking than this happening in the 16th century. It was actually absolutely unprecedented what happened in about 1517 going forward. The Catholic Church had pretty much had hegemony by itself for 1,500 years. You did have a schismatic schism with the Greek Orthodox Church. The Greek Orthodox Church broke away in the sense that they denied the Pope his supremacy. There are basically 5 patriarchates, and they all are equal, but Rome said we're the first among equals. They said, yeah, but we're all equals. And they couldn't agree on what that meant, so basically the other 4 patriarchs kind of broke away. They became the Greek Orthodox Church. We call them schismatics, not heretics. We had heretics throughout, from the book of Acts forward, heretical movements popping up in the Catholic Church repeatedly. It was like a game of whack-a-mole. One would pop up, they'd hit it. One would pop up, you hit it, over and over again. Some of them were quite fun. I mean, you had like the Adamites. The Adamites would say mass naked because that was their ancestor Adam's way of being. There were a lot of very perverse. You had the Weinsteinites. No, I'm just kidding. There were no Weinsteinites, but all sorts of bizarre heretical movements constantly for 1,500 years. But then 1517, a mole popped up and got whacked. It didn't go back down, and then it procreated. We don't know how many Protestant sects we have now, but it's anywhere from 20,000 low end to 50,000 on the high end. Probably in about 25,000 range. Again, unprecedented. But that's what the Reformation was. It was a splintering of what they called Christendom. It was a splintering into made subparts. So what caused it? This is tough. I mean, I could go on out of this for probably 3 hours. What caused the Reformation? Now, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to set the stage as to what would cause such a momentous occurrence to happen. Well, first off, remember, 13th century and the 1200s, the Catholic Church was very strong. Yeah, there's some cracks here and there, but you had what they call the highlight of the Middle Ages. St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventura, mystics. Mystics were rock stars. It was a great time to be Catholic, okay? In the 14th century, the wheels come off. You had the Black Death. Upwards of 60% of the population wiped out by the Black Death. It may have been 40%, who knows, but we know it's a lot. We know that clergy was particularly hard hit by the Black Death because there's one way to avoid the Black Death. When it came to town, you left town. The good clergy didn't leave town. Those priests and nuns and monks, they stayed back and cared for the dying. They caught it, they died. We know of one order in Paris, every brother was killed. We know that the clerical rate of death was probably 80 or 90%, and of those are probably the good ones. There are plenty of bad clerics as well. Well, they took off. So, I mean, we don't know. Was every good priest and nun wiped out in the Black Death? It's conceivable. Probably not. But you take a very spiritual society and you kill the spirit part of it, the leaven and the dough is completely wiped out. You had the papacy going through a rough time. It was a prestigious, no one messed with the papacy. Everyone respected who they were. But then you had a thing called the Avignon captivity where Pope Clement, a Frenchman, decided, it's too hot to go across the Alps into Italy. When he got elected to Pope, he stayed in France, Avignon. And then when winter came, the weather got cold. They said, you need to go now. He said, I can't cross the Alps during winter. And he kept staying. He stayed for 75 years, he and his successors. Finally, they left. And by the way, during this time, it became like a French thing. It was no longer a Roman thing. And Rome had aura because of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was unprecedented. It was an awesome creation. And being in Rome gave the papacy that aura. They lost that shine, being in Avignon for 75 years. They go back to Rome. Gregory XI goes back to Rome. He dies. They get ready to appoint a successor because the enclave is always held where the Pope dies. So he goes back to Rome. He dies there. And they're thinking, let's go back to Avignon. Rome had kind of suffered decay because the Pope wasn't there, had all its bureaucracy, everything kind of decayed. And the Roman mob basically said, you're not going to leave in here, and you better elect an Italian, or we're going to rip your arms off and beat you with them. And so the cardinals said, yeah, okay, Urban VI, he's our man. And they vote for this guy, he's Italian. He's not a good man. He starts taking vendettas out on his adversaries. There's accounts of him having some cardinals tortured. And the other cardinals said, this guy is not our man. We didn't really elect him. That was invalid. We're under pressure. So they appoint Clement VII as being the real pope. Well, a pope can't be replaced. This isn't democracy. And Urban's saying, I didn't resign, I didn't die. So now you have two popes. A group of peacekeepers say, okay, fine, you're both done. We'll appoint a third pope. Same problem. The first two didn't resign or die. So now you have three popes. This went on for 40 or 50 years, basically making the papacy a laughing stock among people. So now its shine's really gone. So this is not a good development. On top of that, you have a poorly educated clergy. Back then, I'm not talking clergy, I'm talking at the Father Vilia, the people at the parish level. They were not well prepared. They were peasants, and basically if you lost your priest, you just went and you picked the peasant and said, okay, you're the priest now. Very little, if any, training. Most of them couldn't speak Latin. They weren't very inspiring members of society. They often had no vocation. Having no vocation, they often didn't have a vocation for celibacy. Having no vocation for celibacy, they often had housekeepers. And the housekeeper kept getting pregnant. Further discreditation of the papacy. These same people who had no real vocation were then exempt from various taxes because they're clergy. They didn't have to do civic duties like take night watch. And if they committed crimes, they couldn't be tried by the secular courts. They got tried by the ecclesiastical courts, which maybe weren't quite as harsh on them as maybe they should have been, because they're all kind of a closed circuit. A lot of resentment towards the clergy. You then have monasteries. Now, I don't know where the nearest monastery is. There's an Episcopalian one of the three rivers, but back then they're like McDonald's. If your town is big enough to have a McDonald's by today's standards, it probably had a monastery. They're all over the place. And monasteries, keep in mind, started with noble purposes. Usually a man or two or five would go out into the wilderness to get away from society, and they'd pray and fast. That's all they did. They became holy. Lay people would go out to visit them to get advice about their marriage, about their business, about whatever it is, and they actually got lay following, and the lay following say, get out of the tent, here's some money, here's 5 acres of land, build yourself a nice place. And they'd keep getting endowed. Money over the hundreds and hundreds of years, more and more money poured into the monasteries, and the monasteries then attracted sloths because the hired help did all the work. All you did was quote unquote play. I don't know what that meant, being Nintendo or what it was, but they didn't do anything. You had the Charleston, the fat monk, the caricature. That's what this refers to, and greatly resented. People didn't like the monasteries. They said, you people are supposed to be in there being holy, getting close to God, and it's filled with sloths and just often drunkards and bad people. So again, further discreditation of the church. You have institutional problems at the bishop and papacy level. And keep in mind, the church needs money. Everyone will tell you that when your pastor gets up and asks for money, it's because the church has legitimate things to do. And that was no different back then. They had hospitals, missionary work, maintained churches, pay clergy. They had to have money. How they got money back then were church taxes and whatnot. But when that wasn't enough, and it wasn't, they resorted to other means. Those means weren't good. One of the favorite means was selling bishoprics. So bishop dies, you have to replace them, you pay the pope, you buy it. It's called simony. After Simon Magus in the book of Acts. You buy that seat. Absolute corruption. And it came with big money because the bishoprics had huge swaths of land. Working farms, church taxes. It was a big thing. Back then, in this time period, the law of primogeniture was in place. So if you had 6 kids, 6 boys, the oldest one got everything, or close to everything. The other 5, you weren't allowed to leave anything to them. Because they didn't want anything being split up. They wanted these big, massive estates by law. So what are you going to do for the younger son? Oh, I'll buy him a bishopric. It doesn't matter if he has a calling towards clerical life. I'm going to buy this for him, and then he'll have a source of income, and he can have a wife on the side, type thing. And it's not bad. It's like you're really kind of a secular prince. So again, major problem. And also, those bishoprics are often then tied into family business and family estate. Kind of hand in. So having a bishopric is good for your family. And by the way, I'm working from memory here. I can't read my notes, so I can read part of them. So bishoprics are very profitable. People are buying them. What's better than one bishopric? It'd be two bishoprics, because I have two sources of income, or maybe three or more. And as they buy them up, I'm just investing in more and more stock and collecting money from them. That results in a thing called pluralism. A bishop had more than one diocese. And then absenteeism, because you already have this diocese, you can't really be at this one. And then you're not overseeing the priest, not training the priest. So it's a terrible situation all around, weakening the church. All right, let me make sure I'm not missing anything important here. Those things are all fairly well known. A couple things that aren't so well known, aren't so clear. You had a centralization of power in this time period. Prior to this age, every country was very weak. A central authority like we have in Washington, D.C., unheard of back then. It was a very kind of libertarian type society, a bunch of small communities. That started to change, at least like in Spain and France. Warfare got very expensive, and so a lot more centralization of power. You may recall last lecture I talked about Leo the Great negotiating with Attila the Hun not to sack Rome. And I said, why would Leo the Great, a pope, do that? It's like, because no one else would. So the church filled a very, very practical role for 1,000 years. They filled these political roles, which wasn't necessarily a good thing, but there was no one else in the early years to do it once Rome fell. Once Rome fell, there's no one else to do it. That changed. And now people are like, well, what's the church doing for us now? What exactly is the church is doing for us? The king's taking care of this, these powerful nobles taking care of this. And so just in general continuous slide of the institutional church. The last thing I reference is, because I'd never read this before until I was getting ready for these lectures, is you had a major psychological shift in the people. There were 30 or 40 major reformers. Martin Luther was born in 1483. Every major reformer was born after 1480. And think about that. The Reformation kicks off in 1517. Every major reformer was under age 40. Now in today's world, we have Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, all different age groups. Now the reformers, the lead reformers, were all young men. Well, if you were 12 years old when a major fixture of your mental landscape that had been there for 1,000 years was taken away, you might have a different view of things. When Columbus discovered America in 1492, that shattered 1,300 years of accepted geography. The fact that you can get to the east. And by the way, the flat earth thing, that's just ridiculous. No one thought the earth was flat back then. Look at Jeffrey Burton Russell's The Myth of the Flat Earth. That was basically just a creation of 19th century anti-Catholics who wanted to make all the Middle Ages look stupid by thinking we were a flat earth. No one thought the earth was flat. Probably more people think that today than they did back then. But Washington Irving and a couple others. But Jeffrey Burton Russell lays out, it's actually fairly fascinating. But no one thought that. But they didn't know about us. They didn't know about North America. They thought you could sail west, get to China. Columbus killed that. And that was psychologically quite jarring. We're guessing. Who knows for sure? All right. I have to talk a little bit of philosophy, okay? And I'm going to talk about a thing called nominalism. And you got to listen carefully. I'll try to lay it out. If you've been around 18-month-olds, I think you'll understand what I'm talking about. An 18-month-old is with his mom, and a cat goes across the floor. And his mom looks and says, cat. And the 18-month-old says, cat, repeats it. Next day, a white cat goes across the park. Mom says, cat. The 18-month-old says, cat. Next day, a big tabby walks over. An 18-month-old, without prompting, says, cat. Okay, what the heck happened just now? How is it that us as human beings can form what we call abstractions? Or what this is called the problem of universals. If we are strictly material beings with nothing spiritual about us, what took 3 disparate material items, and all of a sudden came up with a thing like catness. You don't have to see every cat to identify it. You identify them as a species, basically. And that basically was, there's heavy proof, by the way, that we're all immortal with immortal souls. The fact that we can do that. And to sit back and think about it's really stunning. So there must be something about us that's not mere matter. If we're all matter, like some scientists say would have us believe, we couldn't do that. There's something in us that's not matter that allows us to abstract like that. William of Ockham, I don't know what this guy's problem was, but he comes along, he did a couple other things as well, but he came along and said, no, there's no such thing as a nature like catness or dogness or chairness. We don't abstract. The reason we call it that cat, even though we've seen it before, is because God makes it appear to us as a cat. Occam thought anything less than that, anything saying catness, that was detracting from God's glory. And so Occam is saying, so no, there is no catness or dogness. They're all individual things, and God makes them appear to us as all cats. And he could change his mind on that if he wanted to, but that's why I see it. Okay? You go from that, it says, and also there's no human nature either. Because there's no universal nature of anything. It's just what God makes it appear to be. So with that, then you have no natural law. Okay, it's a revolutionary idea. Let me take a look at one note here. Yeah, and this is in the handout. Because it gets rid of natural law and denies that man has a human nature, you have to ask yourself the question in the handout: does God say we have to do things or prohibit things because those things are bad for us or good for us? Or are they bad for us or good for us because God says so? Okay, the Catholic position is clearly the first one. It's part of human nature why we don't do this or that. Basically it's, the sacraments of grace perfect human nature, that type of thing. Occam's like, no, adultery could be cool, murder could be cool, getting drunk could be cool, but God said they're not, so they're not. But he could change his mind any time here. It has nothing to do with who we are. Again, a revolutionary idea. And it caught on. That's the problem. When people would ask Occam, well, how are you going to have morality if you don't believe these things are good or bad for us? He said, well, we got the Bible. What more do you need? The Bible tells us what's good or bad. Who's going to dispute the Bible? And this, by the way, is a testament to just how strong Christianity, the Catholic Church, was. Occam's just like, it's clear. The Bible lays it out. The Bible's not going to change. That's all you need. And do anything else than that detracts from God's glory, and you think you can figure stuff out yourself, you're deluding yourself, you're being arrogant. That's all we need is the Bible, simple faith, chill out. Basically Occam's position. Again, nominalism sweeps large portions of France and Germany. It's taught in the universities. It spawns a type of popular piety where, and these are good people. Like if you read Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ, it's a classic. Well, Thomas à Kempis he sympathizes with this idea. It's like, just read the Bible, simple faith. You don't need all this scholastic learning and all this nitpicking over, how many angels can dance on a needle of a pen, which, by the way, is never debated. The answer to that's obvious. Angels don't have extended bodies, therefore none. But anyway, that was never debated in the Middle Ages ever. But still, there was an awful lot of nitpicky type philosophy, and people were kind of tired of it. Occam kind of cut through it and said, this simple faith. People like Thomas à Kempis said, yeah, you're right. Huge burst of popular piety at this time. And this, by the way, is what I found getting ready for these lectures is fascinating. I really hadn't read a lot of history in probably the past 15, 20 years until I started getting read this. But when I was a younger kid, a younger person, did a lot of it. And the narrative from 1980s to today is disturbing. I remember being taught, learning at University of Michigan, that basically, people were just kind of tired of religion and ready for something new. That wasn't that at all. We now know that church giving was through the roof, endowments were through the roof, prayers for the masses were through the roofs, giving money for stained glass windows, all through the roof. We know the rosary was picking up big time. None of the stuff really pushing from Rome necessarily. And it was a very religious time. And again, we don't know why, but we know that Rome wasn't driving a lot of the popular piety like Thomas à Kempis and the Rosary. Those things are just kind of catching on in and of themselves. The last thing I want to set the table with is a thing called humanism, or technically Northern humanism. These were a group of scholars, good men. St. Thomas More, the saint, he was a humanist. who basically said, back to the basics. Or their big rallying call was back to the sources. They said, just go back to the Southern humanists, the Italian, like Petrarch, they're all about Greek and Roman classics. The Northern humanists were all about recovering the Bible and the early church fathers. Go back and read it in the original languages. Get down with St. Augustine, St. Jerome, the Bible, original text. Railed against corruption in the church. This is absolutely ridiculous, and they railed against corruption in the church. Humanism with nominalism kind of run the table in the universities. Pretty much all the universities are packed with students, and they're all humanists. Not necessarily nominalists, but all humanists. That's going to prove very big to how the Reformation takes off. Why, when you went through whack-a-mole, the mole wouldn't go down. It's because of humanists. All right. I'm going to shift over. What time am I at here? Okay, I'm going to shift over to the start of the Reformation. We have to talk about Martin Luther. Not my favorite topic. A fascinating guy. I don't think anything to say about Martin Luther can probably be contradicted with some fact. Very complicated individual. I was telling Judge Patterson back here, who's a lousy Lutheran. No offense. I was telling him today. I said, I consulted 5 different sources, 5 different accounts of what his younger life was like. The Catholic source talk about his dad would beat him bloody, just downright abusive. His mom at one time did as well. The Lutheran biographer kind of glossed over the whole his whole youth. They literally like a paragraph, nothing on it at all. The secular sources, I basically all said, yeah, dad was not a good guy. Different degrees of how harsh he was, but did not have a good childhood. He, in 1505, he's studying for the law. So that's cool. Yeah, he's studying to become a lawyer. His dad wanted to be a lawyer, and he gets caught in a lightning storm. He freaks out. He prays, hey, if I get delivered from this lightning storm, I'll become a monk. This is July 1505. He survived the lightning storm. 13 days later, something like that, less than 2 weeks, he enters the monastery. Not a lot of formation going on here, but he goes to the monastery. And furthermore, he wasn't one of these McDonald monasteries. He goes in the Augustinians, a new monastic order, and they were very serious. You don't have the fat, lazy monks in the Augustinians. Luther picked a serious monastery. 2 years later, he's a priest. And again, what did priests go? 7 years? So again, not a lot of formation here, but he becomes a priest. He's talented. He's very smart. He suffers. He's spiritually tormented. Scruples. Does everyone know what scruples are? In the Catholic Church, Protestants love this. You have this Catholic guilt. You never feel like you've been truly forgiven. So you go to confession, you confess your mortal sins, then 5 minutes later, it's like, I kind of left that part out. I wonder if I really got forgiven or not. And you start playing mind games with yourself. And it can be, I can't say I've really suffered from it myself, but I've been told it's spiritually torturous, okay? Luther has scruples like in spades, and it just tortured him. Because he's so talented, he was asked to take over a local parish, where he's a phenomenal speaker. He was asked to teach a class at Wittenberg University on the Bible. He still has monastic vows. He starts neglecting the daily office, which you talk to a priest, that's a humongous no-no. The daily office is the breviary, the liturgy of the hours. And stories, I'm not sure they're true, but would have him basically doing 17 days at a time just to get caught up because he skipped it for so long. And he'd feel guilty, so he'd get caught up. Then he had his scruples. And finally, Luther had a thing called the Tower experience, where he basically is like, why am I beating myself up like this? And he was beating himself up. He goes, all I need is simple faith. That's all it takes is faith. I am totally depraved. I can never, ever, ever satisfy my God. And so all I need is simple faith, and that's all I need. And there's nothing I can do to make myself a better person. I'm kind of stuck here because I'm such a miserable individual. And so 2 key tenets of Lutheran doctrine is faith alone, or sola fides, and then also the total depravity of man. And then he combines that with sola gratia, grace only, that God has to do all the work. So you can't cooperate with God's grace. And again, these thoughts, by the way, they take a while. They take 10, 15 years to fully gel in Luther's mind. He's thinking about them. He's come up with these ideas. But that's where it starts, the Tower experience, and faith alone. when he finally starts articulating these beliefs locally, I mean, you can see that they're going to wreak havoc with the sacraments. You know, we have 7 sacraments, and the belief of the sacraments is that they bestow God's grace, and then we cooperate with that grace to become better persons, okay? Well, that had already been kind of looked askance at, because who is closest to the sacraments? Who is closest to the sacraments? It's the clergy. And so the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, or whatever area you want to call it, they're just like, well, the clergy is closest to the sacraments, and look at these sons of bitches. They're terrible. So there's already a creeping doubt in the population about the efficacy of the sacraments. So when Luther lights that fuse later, it takes off. They say, yeah, how good are the sacraments? Because it's not really working for anyone. So Luther has these different ideas. He's beginning to doubt the sacraments. And then in 1517, a man named Johann Tetzel comes through Saxony selling indulgences. I'm not going to get into indulgences. There's a handout there. It kind of lays out what indulgences are and what they're not. Suffice to say, Johann Tetzel was abusing the crap out of them. It was bad. His bishop, Albrecht, had purchased the bishopric for a huge amount of money. He had to finance it. He borrowed from, I love this name, it's the Fuggers. So he had to go to these Fuggers and get some money. No, but it's supposed to be Fuggers, but again, I thought Father Villi would be here, so I'd shock him with the Fuggers comment. But he had to go to the Fuggers and borrow this money with interest, and he had to pay it back. And the Pope said, you can send Tetzel out. This guy can sell anything to anyone. And Tetzel, he was a heck of a salesman. But it was bad. I mean, there are stories of priests paying prostitutes with indulgences, saying, well, here you go, thanks for banging me, here's an indulgence, and when you straighten out your life, you can then cash this in, you'd be all set. I mean, real bad stuff. Trafficking, reselling indulgences, huge moneymaker. It was, by the way, ironically, one of the reasons the bishopric cost so much is because the Pope needed a lot of money to finish St. Peter's Basilica as it stands today. So he's trying to do something for the glory of God, and he does this. Again, this is kind of a warped time just in general. This is too much for Luther. He sees his flock, people he's close to, getting fleeced by this guy. And again, everyone, I mean, good Catholics everywhere is saying, this guy is terrible. Get him out of here. But Luther said, I've had it. So on Halloween, 1517, he comes with 95 theses and nails them to the Wittenberg church door, mostly attacking the practice of indulgences. And by the way, no one knows, apparently now, again, another shift in the past 30 years, no one thinks he nailed him to the church door anymore. You know, most historians are saying that did not happen, categorically did not happen, and some are saying we're not sure if it really happened. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Either way, they got circulated throughout Germany, and it caught fire. He kind of became a household name overnight. The Pope couldn't ignore him much longer. At first, he called it a monkish quarrel at first, and then they worried about it. Couldn't ignore it. So he sends Johann Eck to the Leipzig disputation, where he debates Luther. Accounts vary what happened, but for the most part, I think it's safe to say Luther lost. Johann Eck was younger, smarter, more knowledgeable. He cornered Luther, till Luther finally had to admit that, yes, what I'm saying contradicts what the Pope say and contradicts what the councils have taught. And that's like, game over. You're a heretic. You know, checkmate. Luther's response was, to hell with this. I'm not playing this game because it's faith only. So Luther goes all in at this point. And I always speculate that it was his temper. He's a very proud individual. He just couldn't, he didn't like getting beat in public like that. And he basically threw a tantrum. But we also know from his writings, no, he's being sincere. He later on thanked Eck, by the way, in debate, saying, you made me see more clearly what I was trying to articulate all along. And some say Luther wasn't really ready for the debate because he wasn't ready to debate on Eck's terms. So, but anyway, but he basically says that fine, that's fine, I'm a heretic, okay? Pope Leo issues a bull in 1520, says, yes, 60 days to recant. And Luther's he's publishing various stuff, and Leo's like, stop it, you got 60 days to recant, or you're excommunicated. Luther doubles down. He issues three pamphlets or booklets. I can't get up. It's on the freedom of a Christian, where basically says, look, if you accept my simple faith, you can get rid of all the sacramental type stuff, and you can just focus on loving your neighbor. It's the freedom of a Christian. He had on the Babylonian captivity, where he rails against the corruption of Rome. And he had, which I think is huge, an address to the German nobility. I'm not getting those titles exactly right. where he appeals to a prejudice that's been around for 1,500 years, back to the German barbarians invading Rome. He's like, look at German princes, why are you sending your money down to Rome? Why rise up and throw off this Roman Empire hegemony? Where's your patriotism? And he appeals to that right out of the box, pretty much. He appeals to the German nobility, and it sinks in. He's excommunicated. There's the diet of worms, or worms. I'm sure it's worms. I can't bring myself to say that. Emperor Charles V shows up himself. It's a national conclave. He's supposed to be there. And supposedly he was even bored. He's like, come on, Luther, come on, get it on, let's go. Tell us you're wrong. We got business to conduct here. Luther doesn't back down. On the way to Worms, peasants and people were lining up, cheering him on, saying, you go, Luther. And Luther said, I want night to think about it. He came back and said, I can't do it. I'm not going to recant. Then Charles was like, okay, you're an outlaw. And he'd been given 48 hours safe passage back to Wittenberg. At that point, fair game on Luther's head. He's going to be killed. You're an outlaw, you're outside the law, anyone can kill you. He is then, quote unquote, kidnapped. His friend, Frederick of Saxony, sends a retinue, kidnaps him. No one knows where he went to. Frederick had a huge relic collection, but he kind of liked what Luther was talking about, and he liked the popularity Luther had, and so he put him in the Wartburg Castle and hid him. No one knew where he went to. So he couldn't be killed. Basically, he's under house arrest, but for his own protection. Luther keeps on publishing pamphlets. The crowd goes wild. There's like riots in Wittenberg, stained glass windows being broken, and the Reformation is now full on. Okay, so how did it really succeed? Well, first off, it succeeded in Germany, first and foremost. That was the Holy Roman Empire. And as I mentioned there, it wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, it wasn't an empire. It was Germany because of back a couple hundred years earlier, a guy named Frederick Barbarossa. I love that name, but he put all his effort into conquering Italy. And he gave a bunch of power to the local German nobles. And Germany basically got divided up into hundreds of different municipalities or principalities. So he had no reach. He'd start trying to reach in to grab Luther, and he had to constantly one hurdle after another to get to him. So it's like a maze of principalities. That was the biggest reason it spread in Germany. Second, humanism. Magistrates ruled the different cities. Magistrates were educated people. Magistrates were humanists. They thought, because Luther was so much on back to basic faith, the Bible, criticizing the corruption, they thought he was a humanist. Turns out he wasn't. Luther and humanists they had the fur flying a couple years later against each other, but they thought he was, so they let the Lutherans speak. And they gave him protection. Then when the fights started breaking out, they kind of ruled in Lutherans' favor and said, okay, at this point, we have a town council, we have a debate, and we're going to rule in Lutherans' favor. Now this is a Lutheran town. Sometimes they say Catholic town, but basically each principality chose their religion. And by the way, that's huge. That had never really happened before. For the most part, the Catholic Church had infiltrated politics. Politics had infiltrated the Catholic Church in the sense that the secular authorities didn't have a lot to say in the Catholic Church. Here you see an absolute welding of the state taking over religion. So you talk about the Salem witch trials here in the United States, where secular authorities starts now. This is really the first time you really see secular authorities making church decisions. It's a big development. After this initial grabbing on, you had the printing press. Now, everyone's probably heard the printing press. That's exaggerated. I mean, the printing press has been around for almost 75 years. There are multiple translations of the German Bible at that point, but it did let things move more quickly. And Luther was a master at printing, not cranking out, but he knew how to appeal to mass audience. I heard, and I actually wrote these down in one lecture, who seemed fairly sympathetic to him, referred to Luther's prose as passionate, gutsy, earthy, colorful, obscene. Luther loved scatological references. He one time wrote that he scared away a devil who's tormented him by passing gas. A very, very vulgar individual. And the crowd loved it. The crowd loved it. I mean, it's just like the lowest common denominator. The shock jocks and all that. You have some reasoned discourse where we disagree this. And Luther responded with saying, well, F you. And the crowd, yes, that's really cool. And that's kind of what he appealed to. You start seeing, and Luther didn't necessarily mean to appeal that, so I'll get that in a little bit. Luther's very conservative politically. He didn't like what he unleashed in the political sphere. But you start seeing a ton of anger, a ton of pent-up anger. One guy whips it out during a mass just to shock the crowd. You have lay Lutherans urinating and defecating in holy fonts. That's why our holy fonts when you walk in Catholic Church are now so high. So that, I'm just kidding. That's but that would happen. And again, this is not reasoned theological discourse we're talking about here. This is just fury and anger from illiterate peasants. Germany, if you're going at the Hunger Games, Germany had been treated by Rome kind of District 12 was treated by the capital. It just fleeced repeatedly. And the peasants had been squeezed, the knights had been squeezed, and they resented it greatly. Other countries weren't squeezed as much as poor Germany was. And so anything to fight back against Rome was thoroughly welcomed. On top of that, the Catholic Church didn't appreciate what was going on. And for years, centuries, you excommunicate someone, debate's over. We had our debate, you lost, you're excommunicated. If you don't recant, it's over. So for the Catholic Church to respond to Luther, it's like, what? I'm not going to respond to you. You already lost. It's over. You got excommunicated. Why are we even discussing this? So the Catholic Church didn't respond, didn't realize different sheriff in town, different set of facts. So again, it just kept spreading like wildfire. Let's see. Another big thing, these bishoprics you're talking about, they weren't necessarily they didn't have a calling. By converting to Lutheranism, they could set themselves up as secular princes, and a lot of them did. The head of the Teutonic Knights, for instance, now he wasn't a bishop, but he basically Lutheranized the order, and now he became a prince. You had a lot of bishops, and we're going to see this in the next lecture in spades in Henry VIII's England, but you had a lot of princes who decided, if I turn Lutheran and we don't believe in spiritual progress, we don't need all these priests, we need to support all these priests, we sure as heck don't need the monasteries, and they can seize all that land. So it was a big power grab for the German bishops, German princes, and some German bishops. And so you have sincere religious belief, don't ever doubt that, but you have huge economic motives, and then you have social motives playing into a lot of pent-up anger going on there. Last thing, sometimes people look at Luther as being, the first one about and read the Bible, interpret the Bible however you please. That was not Luther. Don't ever make that mistake about Luther. None of the early reformers, just like Catholics, no one thought this is freedom interpretation of the Bible. Luther thought, not too humbly, I know what the Bible says. I'll tell you what the Bible says. I'll tell Rome what the Bible says. Just listen to me, and we'll be okay. He wasn't tolerant of other people telling him what the Bible said. And you'll see he and the early reformers didn't get along well at all. Because when other reformers came on the scene and said, well, we know what the Bible says too, Luther, and they started disagreeing with it, the fur flew. I'm going to mention probably one of the earliest heretical movements that popped up after Luther, the Zwickau prophets. These were a group of men who said, you know what, you're right, there is no authority higher than us. In fact, there's no even Bible. It's the Holy Spirit speaking to us directly. And rumors are, at least one of the men was quite immoral because whatever his passion was, whether it was sex or drinking or whatever, that was the Holy Spirit telling him to do it. And so there's a thing called pneumatic antinomianism, where basically all your immorality is justified. And the Zwickau prophets kind of bought into this. This type of stuff sickened Luther because he was dogmatic about his own beliefs. But it portended a lot more to come. Let's see, I think that's about it we have for today. Next month we're going to kick in with Zwingli, the Anabaptists, and we'll talk about John Calvin and the rest. So that's it. So, yeah.